So you have finally met someone you feel could be the one. Now what? Well, this is where things get both interesting but also a little bit awkward. The getting to know you stage of a relationship is interesting because you're learning a lot about this new person in your life. But it's also somewhat awkward because you're spending time with someone you barely know. And so regardless of how you met, and although it's highly unlikely that this person could be a serial killer, a responsible mother or that little voice in your head will tell you to be careful and to check him out. And so this is where the research skills that we previously discussed, the background checks, etc., come into play. And so anyway, that's just a note of caution. Much of the getting to know you phase of a relationship is focused on determining mutual interest, compatibility, and the all-important factor, chemistry. So as you may know from previous personal experiences, some of these things can sometimes be determined either within the first few dates and sometimes with a few more dates to discover whether you want to continue dating, just be friends, or move along. If you're definitely interested, it'll be important to determine if the person you are now dating is interested in a long-term relationship or whether they're just looking for a casual relationship or a sex partner. If sex is all you're interested in, then that kind of relationship may meet your needs. But if a long-term relationship is your goal, it will be critical to clearly establish right up front that that is what you're looking for. When you're experiencing the bliss of dating somebody that you really like, you may miss or choose to overlook some things that could become a problem later in the relationship. So it's important to pay attention to these red flags early on and determine if they are things that can be either corrected or accepted, or whether they are deal breakers. And so let's talk about some of those things. The first thing I like to identify as little things. So habits and quirks that might seem cute to you at first can become annoyances later in the relationship. So these seemingly little things can eventually drive you absolutely crazy. So this can include the way somebody eats, words or phrases they regularly use. Those things can become an issue. But these little things are usually things that can be corrected or just accepted. You learn to live with them. So therefore, they're typically not deal breakers. And let me give you an example of this. Some years ago, I had been a bridesmaid at a friend's wedding. And a month or so after the wedding, we met for breakfast and just in general to catch up and look also at some of the wedding photos. Now, she and her husband had not lived together prior to their marriage. And while talking about married life, I asked her if there was anything that she had learned about him now that they were married that she had not known before. Not really, she said. But then she went on to say, well, there is one thing. When we go grocery shopping together, he likes to park far from the store where fewer cars are parked, because our car is new and he doesn't want it to get dinged by other car doors opening. And so since we usually go after work, I'm typically wearing heels, and I don't like having to hike to the store and from the store in heels. Also, she continued, he is kind of a clean freak. Once we get home from the store with groceries, he wipes down all of the grocery items before putting them away, and he organizes them in the cabinets. I thought to myself, two things aren't bad. And another thing, she continued, after he works out at the gym, he likes to put towels down in the car and on our couches so that his sweat doesn't get on the couches or the car, which means that I end up washing a lot of towels when I do laundry. So little did I know that I had opened up a can of worms just by asking that simple question. So the lesson is that although she may have noticed some of those things before they got married, she didn't really notice them until she was being directly impacted by them on a daily basis. And so, needless to say, she learned a lot about her husband in the first few months of marriage. Luckily, these really were little things and not deal breakers. And I'm happy to report that they've been married, happily married, for a while. So when we're talking about the little things, it's again important to remember that these are usually things that you can work with or get over. So this brings us to the next topic, which is possible deal breakers. And unlike the little things, there may be some standards or expectations that you have that are completely non-negotiable, and therefore they're deal breakers. So interestingly enough, these issues usually revolve around values and beliefs that are related to things such as family planning, religious beliefs, financial issues, and even political leanings. Now, we've all been advised to avoid discussing these topics in mixed company, and the reason, of course, is that they are potentially highly divisive and contentious issues. And so when you're entering, though, into a personal relationship, it's really important that you know where the other person stands on these topics, and specifically because big problems can arise from the differences or concerns related to these. Let's start with political views. Views associated with political affiliations can lead to heated discussions and disputes. Now, the question is whether you can live with a partner who supports political positions to which you may be opposed. So, in other words, can you agree to disagree on matters that are impacting your fundamental beliefs or values? Now, there are couples that seem to somehow have learned to navigate their political differences. Now, you've heard likely of James Carville, a Democrat, and his wife, Republican consultant Mary Madeline. And there are other couples that somehow seem to make it work in spite of their differences. But it may be that these couples may be open to compromise or might be more moderate in their political leanings than they admit publicly. So they may not be as far left or as far right, but a little bit more moderate. Another topic that may be an issue is, and a possible deal breaker, is whether or not to have children. Issues related to family planning should be resolved well in advance of committing to a long-term relationship. And this issue in particular can tear a relationship apart after the relationship has been developed. So being upfront with your desires and your expectation on this topic, maybe not on the first date, but somewhere near the beginning of the relationship, is one of the best things you can do. So this is something, again, that should be discussed earlier in the relationship rather than later. And also, thinking that you can change a person's mind regarding this topic is a huge mistake. Now, another issue to consider is whether the partner coming into the relationship has children from a prior marriage, because that is going to affect the dynamics of your relationship. And I want to discuss that a little bit further later. Now, in some cases, couples who go into marriage in agreement that they would both like to have children may sometimes receive devastating news that they can't have children. And so this is a possible circumstance that should also be discussed in advance. I knew a woman who married her husband with the intention of having children. At some point, their efforts to conceive were failing, and they were informed that there were issues preventing her from getting pregnant, medical issues. The couple decided to undergo in vitro fertilization, and after undergoing the treatment and still being unable to conceive, the husband wanted to discontinue their efforts, but the wife wanted to move forward with the treatments. And she also suggested adoption as an alternative. The husband was not open to adopting a child and refused to continue with IVF. So they were both unable to resolve their differences, and they ended up divorcing. Religious beliefs, or the lack thereof, can be deal breakers when it comes to long-term relationships. So it's not uncommon with people with differing backgrounds or beliefs to get together in spite of that fact. So you'll need to determine whether your beliefs are so different that you can't appreciate or adapt to the differences. But in some cases, one partner will accept or adopt or even convert to their partner's religion. In other cases, each partner may adhere to his or her own religious beliefs and traditions. This can sometimes leave a person feeling unsupported by the other person. Another issue that should be considered in relation to this topic is what or how and in what religion any future children will be raised. Another possible deal breaker is the issue of the baggage someone brings with them into the relationship. And that may impact you in a significant way, and so these could be deal breakers. Now, these include things such as physical and or mental health issues, addictions to drugs, alcohol, gambling, smoking, any number of things, employment issues or unemployment issues, bad credit and financial problems, a prior criminal or legal history, prior marriages, or children from a prior relationship. Any of these things can be severely difficult on a relationship. However, whether these circumstances are in fact deal breakers depends on you, on your own level of knowledge, acceptance, preferences, your beliefs, and your ability and your preparedness to deal with these things, whatever it happens to be. Now, keep in mind that it's possible that your new mate may not disclose an issue, any of those that we just listed, and that you don't become aware of it until well after the relationship is established. But whatever it is that the circumstance or issue entails, it's highly likely that it will create added stress in your relationship. And so regardless of what the issue is, you should make every effort to learn about it, or as much as possible about it, so that you are prepared to deal with the potential impact. Now, the last item regarding children from a prior marriage, bringing children into a new relationship will definitely impact the dynamics of the relationship. And the interests of the children have to be considered because they're like innocent bystanders. They're just being taken along for the ride. However, currently, in our current society, blending families is not unusual. And so there are a lot of resources that are available to help people successfully integrate and address any issues associated with blending families. Now, let's move on to talk about the next topic, and that is deal breakers. There are some red flags that can signal some pretty serious issues, and these are clear signs of bigger problems that will come. So any early signs of jealousy, possessiveness, mistreatment, anger, mental or physical abuse may initially be subtle, but they should never be taken lightly. These warning signs should never be ignored. And so it's likely that the behavior that they're displaying might be just the tip of the iceberg. There's a powerful quote from Maya Angelou that says, "When someone shows you who they are, believe them the first time." So this, in effect, means that you should not ignore or deny the warning signs, and that once you see a person for who they really are, don't make excuses for him. Run as fast and as far as you can in the opposite direction. Too often, especially early in a relationship, we want to believe that a person's conduct is just a one-time occurrence, or we make excuses for and we rationalize and normalize their conduct. You might, for example, feel very flattered the first time your new mate displays jealousy. You may think it just proves how much he really cares, not realizing that jealousy can later turn into rage, violence against you or another person. So don't fool yourself. Be honest with yourself. Call it like it is. And regardless of whether the bad behavior arises from other things such as substance abuse, or they have anger management issues, or some sort of a personality disorder, violence and abuse of any kind, mental or physical, are never acceptable and should never be tolerated. And so, to be clear, you never deserve to be physically or verbally abused by someone. Not just in a romantic relationship, but in general. And so it's important to note that if you somehow end up in the situation, it's never too late to get out. And speaking again from a mom's perspective, that it's much, I know that people say it's much more easily said than done, but it's never impossible to get yourself out of a bad situation. So there are many resources available to assist those who might find themselves in this sort of situation. Now, we won't go any further into that issue because it's both a serious and a complicated issue, and it requires or may require professional guidance and advice.